Ashford, Ohio, 2:47 p.m., August 15th. The explosion of glass sent Isabella Martinez stumbling backward, her cleaning rag falling from trembling hands. Shards of stained glass, centuries-old depictions of saints and angels, rained across the marble floor of St. Michael's Church like crystallized prayers shattering against reality. Then came the fire, not creeping, not growing, just there, erupting around the massive wooden crucifix that towered 15 feet above the sanctuary as if ignited by invisible hands. Orange flames wrapped the ancient oak beams in a crown of impossible light, roaring with an intensity that made the summer air shimmer and dance. "Dios mío!" Isabella screamed, her voice echoing off stone walls that had stood for 130 years. "Teresa! Get out! Get out now!" Her 17-year-old daughter stood frozen in the centre aisle, transfixed by what she was seeing. The fire consumed the cross's wooden frame with ravenous hunger, flames climbing toward the vaulted ceiling, but the carved figure of Christ, painted and sculpted by Italian masters in 1893, remained untouched as if protected by an invisible shield. "Mama, look at his face," Teresa whispered, her voice carrying an awe that transcended fear. "He's not burning." Isabella grabbed her daughter's arm, prepared to drag her toward the exit, but found herself unable to move, because Teresa was right. The Christ figure, which should have been the first thing to catch fire, its ancient paint and varnish highly flammable, showed no signs of damage. The flames danced around it, caressing the carved features without consuming them. The sanctuary doors burst open. James Holloway, 63-year-old Vietnam veteran and the church's volunteer security guard, charged in with a fire extinguisher. Behind him came a flood of townspeople drawn by Isabella's screams and the smoke billowing from shattered windows. "Everyone out!" James commanded, his military training overriding the impossibility of what he was witnessing. But even as he raised the extinguisher, something stopped him. The fire wasn't spreading. It clung to the cross's wooden frame with deliberate precision, burning hot and bright, yet refusing to touch the surrounding banners, the altar cloth just feet away, or the wooden pews that should have ignited instantly. "That's not natural," James muttered, lowering the extinguisher. "Fire doesn't behave like that. Fire doesn't choose." Within minutes, 50 people crowded into St. Michael's sanctuary, their faces illuminated by flames that painted them in shades of orange and shadow. Some fell to their knees immediately, rosaries appearing in weathered hands as prayers began flowing in English, Spanish, and whispered Latin. Others stood paralyzed by the intersection of terror and wonder. If you're enjoying this already, smash like, subscribe, and most importantly, give this video a hype. And I want to know, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country down in the comments. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Dr. Sarah Chen, the town's only physician and self-proclaimed agnostic, pushed through the crowd with the scientific detachment of someone trained to diagnose rather than believe. She studied the flames with clinical precision, noting their colour, their movement, their impossible containment. "This violates basic thermodynamics," she said, to no one in particular. "Heat rises, fire spreads, wood burns at a consistent rate. This—" She gestured helplessly at the burning cross. "This shouldn't exist." Father Miguel Santos emerged from the sacristy, still in his gardening clothes, his face pale with shock. At 42, he had served St. Michael's for 7 years, had buried the dead and baptized the living, had weathered the slow decline of his parish with quiet dignity. But nothing in seminary had prepared him for this. The flames reached their apex, stretching toward heaven with an intensity that should have reduced the entire cross to ash in minutes. The heat was oppressive, pushing the crowd backward, making it difficult to breathe. And then, as Father Miguel raised his hand to make the sign of the cross, something extraordinary happened. The fire began to form a pattern. At first it was subtle, just a suggestion of shape within the chaos. But as more people began to pray, as voices joined together in spontaneous harmony, the pattern became unmistakable. The flames weren't random, they were sculpting something, revealing rather than consuming. "Mother of God," whispered 80-year-old Agnes O'Connor, her Irish accent thick with emotion. "Do you see her? Do you see the Blessed Mother in the flames?" Some saw it, others didn't, but what nobody could deny was that the fire was behaving with impossible intention, as if guided by an intelligence that understood exactly what it wanted to reveal. Then the sirens arrived. Fire trucks, police cruisers, an ambulance. Chief Daniel Rodriguez burst through the doors with his crew, ready to battle the blaze that dispatch had reported as fully involved structure, fire. Instead, they found 50 people standing in reverent silence before a burning cross that refused to spread, flames that refused to consume, and a Christ figure that gazed down at them all with an expression of infinite compassion, completely untouched by the inferno surrounding him. Daniel had been a firefighter for 27 years. He had seen warehouse fires, chemical explosions, houses reduced to foundations, but he had never seen anything like this. "Don't spray it," Isabella Martinez said urgently, stepping forward to block the hose crew. "Please, something divine is happening." Daniel wanted to argue, wanted to follow protocol, wanted to do his job, but as he stared at the flames that obeyed no natural law, he found himself lowering his hand. Because whatever this was, miracle or malice, divine intervention or elaborate hoax, it demanded something more than water and foam. It demanded witness, as the August sun continued its arc across the Ohio sky, as more people flooded into St. Michael's Church, as cameras began appearing and cell phone videos started uploading to social media. The fire burned on, not destroying, not spreading, just burning, with a purpose no one could explain but everyone could feel. The Christ on the cross remained serene, untouched, eternal, and above him the flames wrote a message in a language older than words, asking a question that would divide the town, challenge the faithful, and force everyone who witnessed it to choose between explanation and wonder. Was this heaven breaking through, or something far more dangerous? Ashford had once been the kind of place where churches outnumbered bars, and Sunday morning meant empty streets as families gathered for worship. But that Ashford belonged to a different era, preserved only in sepia photographs hanging in the Historical Society, and the fading memories of those who remembered when faith was as common as breathing. The town's decline had been gradual but inevitable. The steel mill that employed half the county closed in 1987. Young people fled to Columbus and Cleveland, seeking opportunities that Ashford could no longer provide. Main Street filled with vacant storefronts, their dusty windows reflecting the slow death of small-town America. St. Michael's Church had mirrored that decline. Father Miguel had arrived 7 years ago to find a parish of 800 dwindled to barely 200 active members. The magnificent building, built by Irish and Italian immigrants who had pooled their pennies to create something worthy of God, now felt cavernous and cold, its beauty lost on the scattered handful who still attended Mass. "We're dying," trustee Margaret Walsh had told Father Miguel bluntly during his first budget meeting. "Not quickly enough to close, but not strong enough to survive. We're ghosts haunting our own building." Father Miguel had tried everything. Contemporary music, which alienated the elderly. Traditional Latin Mass, which confused the young. Social media outreach, which attracted exactly 0 new parishioners. Nothing worked. Ashford had simply moved on from institutional religion, finding their Sunday mornings better spent sleeping in or watching football. But the real division in Ashford ran deeper than attendance numbers. The town was fractured along lines that had hardened over decades. The old families, Irish Catholics and Italian Americans, whose grandparents had built St. Michael's, viewed newcomers with suspicion. Hispanic immigrants who worked the remaining farms felt unwelcome in a church that had never bothered to offer Spanish Mass. The college-educated professionals who remote worked from renovated Victorians saw organised religion as quaint at best, dangerous at worst. James Holloway represented one faction. Raised Catholic, but lapsed for decades, he had returned to the church after his wife's death from cancer. He volunteered as security not from faith but from routine, something to fill the empty hours that grief created. Dr. Sarah Chen represented another. Daughter of immigrants, Harvard Medical School, graduate. She had chosen Ashford specifically because it needed a doctor, and she needed distance from her family's expectations. Her atheism was polite but firm. "I deal in evidence," she would say. "Show me empirical proof, and I'll believe." And then there was Lucas Kane, 23 years old, former altar server, now the town's most vocal critic of organised religion. His blog, Ashes of Faith, had gained a modest following by documenting what he called the hypocrisy and harm of institutional Christianity. He had particular contempt for St. Michael's, which he blamed for his parents' divorce. His mother's devotion to the church had, in his view, blinded her to his father's abuse, and his own wasted youth serving a God who never answered prayers. That building is a monument to delusion, Lucas had written just weeks before the fire. The sooner it empties completely, the sooner Ashford can finally move forward. Nobody suspected that Lucas's anger masked something deeper, a desperate longing for the faith he had lost, a grief for the comfort he once found kneeling before that very crucifix he now publicly scorned. The night before the fire, Lucas had done something he told no one about. He had broken into St. Michael's, not to vandalise, but to sit in the darkness and remember who he used to be, the boy who believed, the child who prayed with earnest faith that God was listening. He had knelt before the crucifix in the empty church, surrounded by the ghosts of prayers he no longer believed in, and whispered the words that shame and pride would never let him speak in daylight. If you're real, show me. If any of this mattered, prove it. Then he had left, locking the door behind him, convinced that his prayer, like all prayers, would disappear into an indifferent universe. Less than 12 hours later, the cross would burn, and Lucas Kane, sitting in his apartment above the hardware store, would see the smoke rising and know with terrible certainty that something had answered. Whether it was the response he wanted or the judgment he feared, he couldn't yet tell. But one thing was becoming clear to everyone in Ashford. The sleepy town that had forgotten how to believe was about to be forced into a confrontation with the supernatural that would shatter every comfortable assumption they had built their lives upon. The fire at St. Michael's wasn't just burning wood. It was burning away the comfortable distance between the sacred and the mundane, forcing everyone to choose. Was this world purely material, or was something else breaking through? By the time the flames began their impossible dance around the crucifix, Ashford was no longer a town divided by demographics or politics. It was a town divided by the oldest question humans have ever faced. When the supernatural manifests in broad daylight, in front of witnesses, captured on cameras, do you believe your eyes or your worldview? The fire burned for 7 minutes, 7 minutes that felt like hours to the 57 people who witnessed it firsthand. 7 minutes that would be dissected frame by frame in thousands of videos uploaded to social media before the flames even died. 7 minutes that would divide Ashford into believers and skeptics with a precision no political movement or religious revival had ever achieved. Dr. Sarah Chen stood in the third pew, her phone recording every second, her medical training screaming that what she was witnessing violated fundamental laws of physics. Fire required 3 things: fuel, heat, and oxygen. Remove any one element and combustion ceased, yet this fire burned with impossible intensity while refusing to spread to the abundant fuel surrounding it. The heat signature is wrong, she muttered into her phone's microphone, narrating her observations with clinical detachment. Fire radiates in all directions. This is contained in a way that suggests... She trailed off, unable to complete the sentence, because the only word that fit was intelligence. Behind her, Agnes O'Connor prayed the rosary with trembling fingers, tears streaming down her weathered Irish face. She had emigrated to Ashford in 1962, had knelt before this crucifix for weekly mass for over 6 decades, had whispered her deepest fears and greatest hopes to the Christ figure that now gazed serenely through flames that should have consumed him. Holy Mary, Mother of God, Agnes prayed, her voice rising above the fire's roar. Pray for us sinners now and at the hour of our death. As if responding to her prayer, the flames shifted, not randomly, not like wind-blown fire, but with purpose. They pulled back from the crucifix's base, creating a clear zone around Christ's feet. They intensified around the cross's arms, forming what looked impossibly like wings of light. Are you seeing this? Isabella Martinez grabbed her daughter's shoulder, her voice breaking. Teresa, tell me you're seeing this. Teresa couldn't speak. She had stopped filming with her phone, unable to look at the scene through a screen. When experiencing it, directly felt like the most important moment of her 17 years. In the flames, she saw shapes that her rational mind insisted weren't there, but her heart recognized immediately. A woman's face, serene and sorrowful, arms outstretched, a mantle of stars. It's her, Teresa whispered. La Virgen. She's in the fire. James Holloway wanted to dismiss it as mass hysteria, as desperate people seeing patterns in chaos the way humans always did, but his military training had taught him to trust his observations, and what he observed defied every rational explanation. The fire wasn't spreading because it didn't want to spread. The Christ figure wasn't burning because something was actively protecting it. "This is wrong," he said aloud, though whether he meant the fire's impossible behaviour or his own growing belief, he couldn't say. Father Miguel stood at the front, arms raised, leading prayers he hadn't known he remembered. The formal liturgical Spanish of his childhood poured from his lips, mixed with Latin phrases from seminary, all of it flowing together into something that felt less like recitation and more like conversation. Then the flames began to fade, not extinguished by water or foam, not smothered by lack of oxygen. They simply stopped. Like a candle blown out by invisible breath, the fire retreated until only wisps of smoke remained, curling upward through the shattered windows like the prayers of saints. The silence that followed was absolute. 57 people stood motionless, hardly daring to breathe, waiting for someone to explain what they had just witnessed. The crucifix remained standing, blackened along its wooden frame, yes, but structurally intact. And the Christ figure. Dr. Sarah Chen approached slowly, her phone still recording, her scientific training demanding she examine the evidence. She reached out with tentative fingers and touched the carved figure's feet. "It's warm," she said, her voice barely audible. "Not hot, just warm, like human skin." The wood around Christ was charred black, rough with carbon and ash, but the painted figure itself showed no damage. Not a crack in the centuries-old paint, not a scorch mark on the pale flesh, not even a smudge on the crown of thorns that circled his brow. "This isn't possible," Sarah whispered, pulling her hand back as if burned. "The heat from that fire should have... the molecular structure of the paint alone. This isn't possible." But it had happened. 57 witnesses, dozens of videos from multiple angles, and a crucifix that stood as silent testimony to 7 minutes when the natural laws that governed reality had been suspended by something, or someone, with different priorities. Chief Daniel Rodriguez lowered his radio, his prepared report dying in his throat. "How did you file paperwork for this? What box did you check for miraculous intervention or unexplained divine manifestation?" "Nobody touches anything," he said finally, falling back on procedure because procedure was all he had. "This is now an active investigation scene." But investigation of what? Arson required intent to burn. This fire had burned without destroying. Vandalism required damage. The only thing damaged was everyone's certainty about how the universe operated. Lucas Kane burst through the doors at that moment, having run the 3 blocks from his apartment the instant he saw smoke. He stopped dead at the threshold, his eyes taking in the scene. The blackened cross, the untouched Christ, the awestruck crowd, the wisps of smoke still curling toward heaven. "No," he whispered. "No. No, no. This isn't... You're all seeing what you want to see. It's mass hysteria, psychological projection. There has to be a rational explanation." But even as he spoke, even as his atheistic certainty tried to reassert itself, Lucas felt something crumbling inside his chest, because he had asked for a sign. Alone in the darkness, he had demanded proof. And now... Isabella Martinez approached him, her face still wet with tears, her voice gentle. "Lucas, God answered your prayer." "I never prayed," Lucas shot back, but the lie tasted like ash in his mouth. "Yes, you did," Isabella said. "Last night, I saw you through the window. I was bringing flowers for tomorrow's Mass, and I saw you kneeling right there." She pointed to the exact spot where Lucas had whispered his desperate plea. The crowd turned to look at him, not with judgment, but with something worse, hope, as if his presence at this moment meant something, as if his public atheism and private doubt made him somehow central to whatever had just occurred. "Get away from me!" Lucas stumbled backward toward the door. "This is insane. You're all insane." But Father Miguel's voice stopped him. "Lucas, running won't change what you saw. What we all saw." The priest gestured toward the crucifix, still smoking faintly in the afternoon light. "Something broke through today, whether you call it God, or the universe, or cosmic consciousness. Something responded to the faith and doubt and anger and hope in this room. Ignoring it won't make it less real." Lucas fled, but he couldn't outrun the image burned into his mind. Flames that chose what to consume, a Christ who endured fire without burning, and the terrible possibility that the God he had spent 3 years convincing himself didn't exist had just proven otherwise in the most dramatic way imaginable. Behind him, in St. Michael's Church, the faithful continued to pray while the skeptics struggled to explain. and above them all, the blackened cross stood as a question mark written in smoke and ash. When heaven breaks through in ways that cannot be denied, what excuse remains for disbelief? By evening, St. Michael's Church had been cordoned off with police tape, transformed from sacred space to crime scene. Not because anyone believed a crime had been committed, but because Chief Rodriguez needed to impose order on a situation that defied all conventional categories. The Ohio State Fire Marshal arrived at 6 p.m., a no-nonsense woman named Patricia Kemp who had investigated hundreds of fires and prided herself on finding rational explanations for everyone. She took one look at the blackened crucifix and the untouched Christ figure, and her professional confidence visibly cracked. "I need to see all video footage," she announced to the crowd still gathered outside. "Every phone recording, every security camera, every dash cam from cars passing by. I want it all." What she got was unprecedented. 42 different video recordings from multiple angles, all showing the same impossible sequence. Fire erupting instantaneously around the cross, flames refusing to spread, the Christ figure remaining pristine despite heat that should have destroyed it, and then the fire simply stopping. Patricia spent 3 hours in her mobile command unit, reviewing footage frame by frame, looking for signs of accelerant, evidence of wiring, any indication of human intervention. She found nothing. "The ignition point appears to be everywhere, simultaneously," she told her team, frustration evident in her voice. "It's as if the cross spontaneously combusted, except spontaneous combustion doesn't work like this. And even if it did, the heat generated should have destroyed everything within 15 feet. Instead, we have a 130-year-old carved wooden figure with not a single crack in its paint." Dr. Sarah Chen, who had been allowed to remain as a witness, offered her own analysis. "I've been reviewing my footage with thermal imaging overlay. The temperature around the Christ figure never exceeded 150 degrees Fahrenheit. Meanwhile, the wood burning inches away registered over 1400 degrees. There's no natural explanation for a temperature differential that precise." Detective Marcus Webb, brought in from Columbus for his experience with arson investigations, interviewed witnesses one by one. Their testimonies varied wildly in details but converged on impossible consistency. They all agreed the fire had behaved with intention. Isabella Martinez. The flames avoided Christ like a mother's hand protecting her child. James Holloway. "I've seen enough combat to know when something doesn't follow normal rules. This didn't." Agnes O'Connor. "I saw the Blessed Mother in the flames, clear as day. She was protecting her son." Teresa Martinez, age 17. "It felt like the fire was trying to tell us something, like it was a message written in light." Father Miguel Santos. "I believe God manifested his presence in that sanctuary. Whether through miracle or mystery, the divine touched our world. But not everyone agreed. Dr. Sarah Chen's testimony was markedly different. "I saw an unexplained phenomenon that demands scientific investigation. Just because we don't currently understand something doesn't mean supernatural explanations are valid." And Lucas Kane, when finally tracked down to his apartment, refused to be interviewed at all. "I was there for 2 minutes, he told Detective Webb through his partially open door. "I saw smoke and a burned cross. That's all. Leave me alone." The physical evidence was equally mystifying. Samples of the charred wood sent to the state lab showed normal combustion patterns. The paint on the Christ figure analysed as authentic 19th century pigments that should have been destroyed by heat exposure. Yet there it was, intact, unharmed, impossible. "I've been doing this for 23 years, Patricia Kemp told Chief Rodriguez as they stood before the crucifix at midnight, the church illuminated only by emergency lights. "I've investigated warehouse fires, chemical explosions, suspicious burns that turned out to be insurance fraud. I've never once failed to determine a cause." She gestured helplessly at the cross. "But this, I have no idea what happened here. None. Every natural explanation fails. Every rational theory falls apart. I'm going to have to write undetermined origin on my report, and that word will haunt me." Chief Rodriguez understood. He had been raised Catholic, had drifted away in college, had spent his adult life in the comfortable middle ground of believing but not really practicing. Now that comfortable middle ground had been stripped away, leaving him with a choice. Dismiss what he'd seen or accept, that reality contained more than his worldview had allowed for. What if it was a miracle? he asked Patricia, quietly. Then it's outside my jurisdiction, she replied. I investigate fires. I don't investigate God. But even as official investigations stalled on the rocks of the inexplicable, unofficial inquiries multiplied. By morning, the story had gone national. Miracle or mass hysteria? Asked CNN. Fire defies physics in Ohio church, reported the Washington Post. Is this proof of God? Wondered Fox News. The videos went viral. Millions of views, thousands of shares. Comment sections erupted into theological warfare as believers and skeptics battled over interpretation. This is CGI, insisted one popular debunking video. It has to be. Real fire doesn't behave this way. I was there, Isabella Martinez responded in her own viral video. I saw it with my own eyes. No computer generated this. God generated this. Professional skeptic organizations offered $100,000 for anyone who could reproduce the phenomenon under controlled conditions. No one claimed the prize, but not for lack of trying. Amateur pyrotechnicians attempted to create selective fire using every combination of chemicals and techniques they could imagine. All failed. Meanwhile, pilgrims began arriving in Ashford, first a trickle, then a flood. By the end of the week, the population of the small town had effectively doubled with visitors seeking their own encounter with the miraculous. The church remained closed pending investigation, but that didn't stop people from gathering outside, pressing their faces to the windows, leaving flowers and candles and handwritten prayers on the steps. Lucas Kane watched from his apartment window as the crowds grew, feeling increasingly trapped. His inbox overflowed with messages, some calling him a prophet who had summoned divine presence with his doubt, others accusing him of staging an elaborate hoax to mock religion. The truth was simpler and more terrifying. He had asked for a sign, and something had answered. Now he had to decide what to do about it. Late on the third night after the fire, Lucas did something he hadn't done since childhood. He knelt beside his bed and attempted to pray. The words came awkwardly, rusty from disuse. I don't know if you're real. I don't know if that fire was you or just physics we don't understand yet. But if you are real, if you really answered my prayer, then I need to know what you want from me, because I can't keep living in this middle ground between belief and denial. No fire erupted in his bedroom. No voice spoke from heaven. But something shifted in Lucas's heart, a crack in the armour of certainty he had built around his wounded faith. By morning, he would make a decision that would shock everyone who knew him. But first, he needed to understand what had really happened in St. Michael's Church, and for that he would need to talk to the one person who had been there from the beginning, who had seen everything, and whose testimony everyone seemed to be ignoring, Father Miguel Santos, the priest who had been in the garden when heaven broke through. Father Miguel's rectory smelled of coffee and old books, its walls lined with theological texts that suddenly felt inadequate for explaining what he had witnessed. When Lucas Kane knocked on his door at 7 a.m. on the fourth day after the fire, the priest was unsurprised. I wondered when you would come, Miguel said, gesturing Lucas inside. Coffee. They sat in the small kitchen, two men separated by faith but united by confusion. Lucas had spent 3 years publicly dismantling Catholic theology on his blog. Miguel had spent 7 years quietly serving a dying parish. Now they were both grappling with an event that transcended their carefully constructed worldviews. Tell me what really happened, Lucas said without preamble. Not the official story, not what you told the reporters, what you actually experienced. Miguel considered the question carefully. What do you think happened? I think 57 people experienced mass hysteria triggered by an electrical fire. I think our brains are wired to see patterns and meaning in chaos. I think... Lucas stopped, his certainty crumbling. I think I'm lying to myself. Why? Because I was there, for maybe 30 seconds before I ran away, and in those 30 seconds I saw... He couldn't finish. Miguel leaned forward. What did you see, Lucas? I saw the fire avoid Christ like it was alive, like it was conscious, and I felt... Lucas's voice dropped to a whisper. I felt recognized, like whatever was in that sanctuary knew I had prayed for a sign and was showing me exactly what I asked for. The priest nodded slowly. Then let me tell you what I haven't told anyone else. He stood and walked to his desk, returning with a worn leather journal. I keep records of my prayers, my doubts, my conversations with God. 3 months ago, I wrote this. He opened to a marked page and read aloud, Lord, This parish is dying. The people have lost faith. I have lost faith. If you are real, if any of this matters, send us something undeniable. Not for my sake, but for theirs. They need to know you're real. I need to know I haven't wasted my life serving an empty ritual. Lucas stared at him. You prayed for this? Not specifically for fire, but yes, I prayed for an undeniable sign, and 3 months later... Miguel gestured toward the church visible through his window. Heaven responded. Or coincidence. Coincidence, Miguel smiled sadly. That's what I kept telling myself too, until I remembered what I was doing when the fire started. He led Lucas to his back garden, overgrown with tomatoes and herbs, and pointed to a stone bench. I was sitting right there, reading my breviary, when I heard the glass shatter. But here's what I haven't told anyone. 30 seconds before the fire started, I heard a voice. Lucas felt his skepticism and his hope warring within him. What kind of voice? Not audible. Not like hearing someone speak, but unmistakable nonetheless. It said, Your prayer is answered. Witness what I do. Miguel's hands shook as he spoke. I thought I was having a stroke, or losing my mind. Then the windows exploded and I ran inside to find... A miracle, Lucas finished quietly. Or something we don't have categories for yet, Miguel countered. Lucas, I've been a priest for 17 years. I've performed hundreds of masses, heard thousands of confessions, counselled countless people through grief and loss, but I had never, until that moment, experienced anything I could definitively call supernatural. And now? Now I don't know what to think. The fire burned without consuming. The Christ remained untouched. 57 people saw it. 42 videos recorded it. The state fire marshal has no explanation. What am I supposed to do with that information? Lucas stood and paced the small garden. You're supposed to proclaim it as proof of God, rally the faithful, convert the skeptics. Isn't that your job? My job, Miguel said carefully, is to seek truth, and the truth is complicated. Yes, something inexplicable happened, but I don't know if it was God or angels or some natural phenomenon science hasn't discovered yet. All I know is that reality behaved in ways it shouldn't, and my prayer for a sign was answered in the most dramatic way possible. So what do we do? We? Miguel raised an eyebrow. You prayed for a sign for your dying parish, Lucas said, the pieces falling into place. I prayed for proof that God exists. We both got exactly what we asked for, delivered in fire that defies explanation. That can't be coincidence. Miguel smiled, and for the first time since the fire, it reached his eyes. No, I don't think it is. They were interrupted by Agnes O'Connor knocking urgently on the garden gate. The elderly Irish woman was out of breath, her face flushed with excitement. Father! Lucas! You need to come to the church now. Something else is happening. They ran the block to St. Michael's to find a crowd of over 300 people gathered outside, all staring at the broken windows. Chief Rodriguez was there, along with Dr. Sarah Chen and half the town council. What's going on? Miguel demanded. Sarah Chen pointed inside. Her scientific composure completely shattered. The Christ figure. I don't know how to describe this. They pushed through the crowd to peer through the windows. What they saw made Lucas's breath catch and Miguel fall to his knees. The crucifix stood where it had for 4 days, blackened but intact. But now, in the morning sunlight streaming through the broken windows, the Christ figure was crying. Not metaphorically, not symbolically, actually crying. Clear liquid ran from the carved eyes down the painted cheeks, catching the light like diamonds, dripping onto the charred wood below. It started an hour ago, Isabella Martinez said, her voice trembling, just after sunrise. I came to leave flowers and saw the first tear form. Dr. Sarah Chen had already taken samples, which she studied with portable equipment, on the church steps. It's water, just water, but it's coming from solid wood that should be incapable of producing moisture. The temperature inside is 68 degrees, nowhere near condensation point, and it's only flowing from the eyes. Mass hallucination, Lucas said, but the words sounded hollow even to himself. Then, explain the water I just collected, Sarah shot back. Explain the video documentation from 17 different angles. Explain how wood cries, Lucas. They couldn't. Nobody could. As the morning sun climbed higher, as news spread and more people arrived, as the impossible became undeniable once again, Father Miguel stood before the church that had been entrusted to his care and made a decision. We're opening the church, he announced. Whatever this is, miracle, mystery, or something beyond our understanding. People deserve to witness it directly. But the investigation, Chief Rodriguez began. Is over, Miguel interrupted. The fire marshal found no evidence of crime. The church is structurally sound, and whatever's happening inside is either divine or it isn't, but keeping people away from it serves no purpose, except to feed our fear. As the police tape came down, as the first pilgrims entered the sanctuary to kneel before a crucifix that burned without consuming, and now wept, tears no one could explain, Lucas Kane stood at the threshold, making his own decision. He could walk away, return to his apartment, to his blog, to his comfortable atheism, and his justified anger at the God who had let his mother suffer. He could explain this all away, given enough time and determination, or he could walk forward into mystery, into uncertainty, into the terrifying possibility that everything he had spent 3 years denying might actually be true. Lucas stepped across the threshold, and for the first time since childhood, he knelt before the cross and prayed with honest faith. I don't understand, but I'm listening.